Welcome to Be Undaunted. This is the podcast that helps you lead stronger, elevate your impact, and live with more energy.
I'm George Dong, former Navy fighter pilot, Blue Angels flight leader, and corporate executive.
And I'm Tara Collingwood, performance dietitian to Olympians, CEOs, and everyday people that are just under pressure. If you're ready to grow, to strengthen your leadership, and to reclaim your energy.
If you want to feel more intentional, more capable, and yes, more undaunted, you're in the right place. Welcome everybody to Be Undaunted. We've got a fascinating guest for you today. It's going to be great, particularly with the latest excitement with Artemis. Tara, how are you doing over there in Orlando?
George, I was able to watch Artemis from my front yard go into space. So that was very exciting. And I'm already like in awe of our guest today, and we haven't even talked to him yet. So I need to thank you for securing our fabulous guest. Without any further ado, why don't you take it away and introduce him?
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about my good friend, Bill Readdy. Reed's graduated from Annapolis back in 1974, got his wings as a naval aviator, and flew the mighty A-6 Intruder in Attack Squadron 85 aboard the USS Forrestal in the North Atlantic and in the Mediterranean. After that, he went off to test pilot school, became a project test pilot and then an instructor. And in 1984, he was the test pilot school instructor of the year. So we got the real deal with us today. Bill and I met when we were both stationed on the USS Coral Sea. I was flying in Strike Fighter Squadron 131, and Bill was the assistant strike ops officer trying to bring order to the chaos that is strike planning and organizing all the various things that have to go on there with regard to ordnance, to the air plan, and so many other things. Bill headed off to NASA, was selected, and moved to Houston to work at the Johnson Space Center as a research pilot and program manager, working on that highly modified Boeing 747 Shuttle Carrier Aircraft. In 1987, he was selected as an astronaut, and he served in numerous support roles. Bill's logged over 7,000 flight hours in over 60 types of fixed-wing and helicopter aircraft, over 550 carrier landings, and 3 space flights, STS-42, STS-51, and STS-79, logging over 672 hours in space. After flying in space, he was named Associate Administrator for Manned Space Operations. And get this, he had oversight over the Marshall, Kennedy, Stennis, and Johnson Space Centers, as well as the International Space Station, Space Shuttle Program, Space Communications, and Space Launch Vehicles. I'm just worn out reading all that.
I'm glad you are, because I'm like, what? You know, if anyone wants to know how do you become an astronaut, I mean, wow, incredible.
Yeah, just amazing. So after 19 years at NASA, Bill continued his career in aerospace in senior executive positions at Boeing and Aerojet Rocketdyne. So he's really the perfect guest to share deep insights into the 3 broad areas of being undaunted that apply to all of us in this fast-paced, dynamic world. Clarity of vision, purpose, and strategy, high-trust culture, reputation, and relationships, and finally, firing on all 4 dimensions of human energy for peak performance. So, Bill, welcome after all of that, and so good to have you with us today.
Nice to be here.
With our time today, we're going to focus on your second shuttle mission. But before we go there, I'd like our listeners to hear a little bit about your progression at NASA. You went from being a mission specialist to pilot and then to commander, flying on 3 different shuttles. Was that unusual to start out as a mission specialist? I'm not sure I had heard of that before.
Well, I would say it's unusual, but it was kind of an unusual time. I was kind of drafted to go to NASA to help on the return to flight effort after the Challenger. So when I got there, that was my full-time job, really, is implementing the Rogers Commission recommendations on what to fix at NASA and how to get back to flying the space shuttle again.
Got it.
I did that while I was out at aircraft ops, and I was also an instructor pilot out there. And also kind of utility outfielder. I kind of picked up whatever jobs needed doing. And the Shuttle Carrier Aircraft was one of them. One of the Rogers Commission recommendations was, hey, you don't have a backup airplane for that. What happens if the shuttle lands over across the ocean? What happens, if it's someplace other than California? What happens, And as it turns out, the shuttle landed multiple places, fortunately all in the United States by the end of its life. But how do you do that? Well, you look for the gap. And how did they do it last time? Why did they do it this way last time? And so went through all those lessons learned and everything else, and then put together a program and said, well, we've got a very limited amount of time to get this modified and then on board and fly the shuttle in logistics mode across the country and stuff. And I managed to do it. It required a number of trips up to headquarters to get them to streamline the acquisition process.
Yeah, always the red tape, huh?
Yeah. You got to know who to talk to and what red tape to cut. So that was a pretty successful program. So I was parked out at aircraft ops while that was going on. In the meantime, we weren't flying. And the line of folks to fly was pretty long. And so I was lucky to be picked as a mission specialist the first time. That got me in the shuttle probably a couple years sooner than if I'd had to wait. That was not my choice. It was management. And they decided that, I was worth flying sooner rather than later. And it turns out it was a twin shift mission. Of course, mission control never sleeps, right?
Right.
Yeah, they have 3 teams, but most of the shuttle missions start out as like 5-day missions and things like that. And they'd actually put the crew to sleep and let mission control watch the vehicle.
Oh.
Well, mine was the first space laboratory mission. So it was a big laboratory in the back of the shuttle in the payload bay. It was about the size of a school bus, shirt sleeve environment and everything once you got in orbit. But somebody had to fly the vehicle while the rest of the red team was back there doing research, often research on each other. But it was a finite amount of time to go from the cockpit and the shuttle down to the middeck, in the tunnel, down the tunnel, and into the lab. So that's the reason I got picked, is we need another pilot.
Oh, interesting.
It said MS2, but I was really, second pilot for the mission.
Yeah. So, and then in the cockpit, you got the pilot and the commanders.
Right.
If you could briefly describe for our listeners the difference in responsibilities there.
It's not unlike an airliner. There's lots and lots and lots of systems and switches and things like that. Only, for a spacecraft, you have all the things for the 8.5 minutes that it's a rocket ship off the launch pad. Then you're going to spend 2 weeks where it's a spacecraft, which, is a little bit more quiescent. And then you got about 4 hours where you're prepping to come home. And then for 1 hour, it's a hypersonic glider kind of burning through the atmosphere, and followed by 5 minutes of flying manually to get from 60,000 feet over the landing field to the concrete. So there's very much division of labor in those tasks. The commander is obviously, in the left seat. He has the capacity to take over and fly it manually after 30 seconds going to orbit. The pilot has responsibility for all the systems. All the systems are pretty critical systems to make sure the main engines keep firing and hydraulics keep working and ship systems.
Yeah.
And then MS2 rides in the middle seat on the way up and on the way back. That's where I was. And so, I'm kind of looking over their shoulders and making sure that they don't miss anything in the various checklists.
Right, right. And that was on your first mission. And then from there, the second mission, you were the pilot. And then the third mission, you were the commander, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Tara?
George talks all the time about high trust leadership. And as I'm getting to do these podcasts with George and meeting people like you, it really makes me understand how much you have to trust everyone else that you are working with when it is literally life and death. So I'm assuming, obviously, that you go through a lot of training together as a team, but tell us a little bit about the trust that you have in the rest of the team when you are 3 seconds before liftoff and, especially coming back as well to make sure that everybody, you're putting your life in those people's hands.
I guess when you first get down to NASA, you get introduced to kind of a different world. The astronauts are one set of folks. You're surrounded by trainers, then mission planners, mission controllers. And so there are all these concentric, spheres basically surrounding you, all trying to make sure that the mission gets done and it gets done correctly. You train and you train and you train some more and you train with everything broken and you let the ground fix some things, and then you develop very, very intense trust in the team that is surrounding you. And that can be various teams. It can be the trainers. I mean, you have to be able to train and you have to be able to make mistakes. You have to trust them to have the mission in mind. And the mission centers around training you to be an effective mission specialist or pilot or commander. So you make lots and lots of mistakes. Another thing, as part of the training, it sinks in after a while. They assign you a flight maybe as long as 2 years before your flight. Okay. Now, in the meantime, everybody else is going flying and doing this and doing that. But that's your flight. You own it. You own the mission and success or failure as a crew. And that's where I experienced, by example, real leadership from commanders. The first time I flew with an Air Force guy, Ron Grady, just absolutely superb. I was a little bit worried about Air Force guys at first, but as it turns out, he had gone to test pilot school over in England at the Empire Test Pilot School. So he had been one of the early Harrier pilots and had actually made a bunch of deck landings. So we figured that probably checked the Navy square for him. But he was wonderful and very artful about how he made, literally, as you're trying to get the team to meld, made everybody contribute. Even when that maybe wasn't their particular area of expertise, he wanted people to contribute in every facet of the mission. And so he would assign all of us, things that we weren't familiar with that we probably wouldn't be expert at. But the idea was to, make sure that you cross-trained in things. One of the other things that they did at NASA is the simulators. And that's one way to practice without, it's kind of like in airlines, right? You practice. You die a lot in the simulator. You fail a lot in the simulator. The idea is to school you on various systems. And then we put that together. Our simulator is wired and plumbed and everything else to get to the Mission Control Center. So you practice working with the same people that you'll be working with on orbit. And the thing is, they're being evaluated too. They're being trained at the same time. There's a group called the SOUP Simulator who is in charge of setting these weird scenarios that will stress the mission ops team, will stress the crew, and help forge kind of a team that can deal with dynamic problems and get home.
So I think everybody's familiar with the fact that your crew in the shuttle would be the same as you trained over 2 years to get ready to fly. But would the mission control players be the same as well, and these other folks that you're just describing now?
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow, that sure makes a difference. But people are people, and I would imagine that, long hours and over a long period of time, stuff is going to come up. How did you guys handle conflict, if you will, or disagreements or, emotions, situations in order to preserve that level of trust?
The easy answer is with humor and humility. And we all recognize that we're not perfect and that we're going to make mistakes. And grace, okay? The guy's working as hard as he can, but he just couldn't get it, or he couldn't fix the problem, or I couldn't fix the problem. But you spend so much time together that, a lot of things are just almost like telepathy, as you know what they're going to do. And you trust them to do it as part of their responsibility. So it is a high trust organization, to the nth degree.
Right. And as those of us in naval aviation, doing a post-flight debrief was very much a part of our culture in order to drive performance improvement. And one of the key ingredients of that is that everybody has to accept responsibility for their performance. I assume you guys had the same sort of culture at NASA?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every time we would go in the box, just our crew, either in the motion simulator or the fixed space simulator, when we got done with that session, I mean, we would debrief with our trainers what we did incorrectly. I mean, what steps we missed. But when we did integrated simulations, I mean, when we were plugged into the mission control and everything, they were being evaluated too. And so we would have these group debriefs, and they would go on for, more than an hour typically to kind of root out what went wrong. I mean, who did it? And then, as you say, I mean, own your errors.
Yeah.
And learn from your errors.
Right.
And you're not going to do it again. And believe me, if you fail in public, well, not in public, if you fail during an integrated sim, everybody knows it. Everybody knows it.
There's no hiding.
There is no I mean, not only do they have a camera in the cockpit and everything else, but all the telemetry is being monitored. And all the air to ground and space to ground, all that kind of stuff is being monitored.
When you think about the technical demands of a mission, it's incredible. But I want to hear a little bit about kind of the human side. Like for you, what's the most difficult part emotionally, mentally, when you're thinking about you're on that launch pad, especially because you had quite a few aborts on the launch pad, 9 seconds to lift off. What goes through your mind and what's the most difficult part just as a human being, not one of these, machines that's keeping you guys alive? What goes through your mind in those scenarios?
Well, you have to trust your training.
Mm.
But, you're there on the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center. There's another team that's 3.5 miles down the road, and they're also monitoring every, system, every matter of fact, they can see most of the switch throws that we're making in the orbiter cockpit. It's another layer of this integrated team that we're part of. So the launch operations all revolve around Kennedy Space Center. And of course, for a while, recovery operations were at the Kennedy Space Center because we would come back and land on a runway. Matter of fact, Frank Culbertson and I made the first night landing at the Kennedy Space Center, which is appropriate because we're Navy guys, right?
There you go.
Undaunted by a night flight, coming back. At least Kennedy Space Center wasn't moving. The runway was flat, 3 miles long, well lit.
Yep.
So we weren't having to chase lineup back and forth.
That's right. That's right. It was certainly notable to all of us that the 2 pilots on Artemis were naval aviators here recently.
Yeah. And the ringer, of course, was Jeremy, the Canadian, but he was an F-18 pilot too.
That's right. So we had 3 Hornet pilots there driving Artemis. That's awesome. Bill, though, you told me when we chatted a week or so ago that now we're talking STS-51, that you were scheduled to launch in May,
right?
And then you went through a series of aborts that Tara mentioned, and you didn't actually launch until September. So how do you keep your edge over that period of time? Because I would think after a while you'd go, come on.
Well, you go to the Cape. I mean, you fly T-38s to the Cape, and you get in the crew quarters, which is a quarantine facility. And I mean, as a dietitian, you'd know that everything has to be very, precisely cooked to make sure you're not going to hurt somebody's tummy or do this or do that. I mean, and the cooks at the Kennedy Space Center know all the crew members, know what they like, know what they don't like. And then the dietitian, scrambles everything up and says, no, you can't have that. You need more of this. So we fly to the Cape. And so for the first time, I mean, we've already been there for what they call the terminal countdown demonstration test. So that's a dress rehearsal, the entire countdown. You fly to the Cape, you go through quarantine, except for, not for a week. You go out to the launch pad, strap in everything, and go through a countdown. And somewhere in the countdown, they inject a failure. And so you have to go through your shutdown checklist and then unstrap and then get out of the orbiter across the gangplank there, and then you get in the basket, and then you slide down the slide wire to a bunker. That's your last dress rehearsal training for the mission. About 6 weeks later, you come for the day of. And, the weather forecast is great and everything's great. You go and suit up, and then you get in the van that takes you out to the launch pad. You get into the vehicle and strap it in, starts about 2.5 hours before launch. And you're now in an unusual attitude. I mean, imagine if you're sitting with your chair on the floor and your feet in the air. I mean, that's the orientation. I mean, as I'm looking out the front window, I mean, my back is, facing the ground, and I'm looking up at the sky, and I'm looking out across Frank over to the launch pad, and it's sideways. I mean, everything is rotated 90 degrees. But as you're sitting there strapped in, you're in an unusual attitude, and the fluids in your body are starting to, come out of your legs, which are elevated, and then, it all starts to pool in your upper body and everything. So it's a little uncomfortable for a while, but, you're going to go fly. So, I mean, you get, in this particular case, down to 19 seconds, and then you scrub for the day, and turns out it's going to be a couple weeks before they can get one of the hydraulic power units changed out, and so you go grab a shower, get in your jets, go back to the Johnson Space Center, and then go in quarantine again. And the other part of quarantine was baseline data collection, so that they know what to compare the in-space results to your normal 1G activity. But we would then hop in the T-38s and go out to El Paso and do our night training. So we were also 180 degrees out from everybody else. We flew at night exclusively and did that while we were still in quarantine. And then we're back to the Cape again and go through the same thing and scrub again.
Is there ever a time during all of this process with all the different scrubs, or even with all the different training, that you just stepped back and went, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. I mean, I can't imagine a more high stress job. Did you ever question, is this really what I want to be doing and continue to do?
I'd say if you'd asked me that question before my first flight, I had doubts. Matter of fact, the terminal countdown test for my first flight is, you're absolutely dog tired. I mean, we've been training, and of course my head is now full of all kinds of different things that I never knew before, and just going, hey, I've flown the F-18. I've been a test pilot. I've, done all these things. What if I don't like it? Believe it or not, I mean, that kept me awake at night, and I was already pretty doggone tired and all this. But then STS-42, we went off on time and came back, and I thought, why did I ever waste any brain cells on whether or not I'd like it? I mean, it so far surpassed anything I could have imagined. And I imagined all kinds of things. It was so far beyond what I could have ever expected. And the first moments when you're in 0G, 8.5 minutes is all it takes to go from laying on your back in the launch pad to 0G, up above the atmosphere and everything. And as soon as you get in 0G, you find a number of things that kind of surprise you. First of all, getting there was kind of violent. I mean, the first couple of minutes on the solid rocket boosters is shake, rattle, and roll, and very, very, very noisy. You have to almost shout over the intercom to be heard. But as soon as the solid rockets are jettisoned, you can converse in a normal tone of voice when you raise your visor, because the main engines, are these huge turbines, and they're a long way from where you are, and you're going 4 times the speed of sound. So, I mean, it's not catching up with you. It is quiet all the way until you get to main engine cutoff. But in the meantime, there's this relentless acceleration that's going on. It's kind of like a cat shot that goes on for 8.5 minutes rather than 2.5 seconds. So when the solids finally, give up, of course, that gives you 2.5 Gs off the launch pad, and then Bill's a little bit more than that. when they get jettisoned, there's no noise anymore. And the other thing is, it almost feels like, because I've been accelerated at 2Gs, it almost feels like you decelerated a little bit, and then you're kind of stuck in the mud. And except for now, the three main engines are continuing to burn, and they're burning the tank down. The external tank is full of oxygen and hydrogen. So as the tank gets lighter and lighter, main engines are putting out the same amount of thrust. So you accelerate more and more and more until finally the main engines come back to idle. And then there's main engine cutoff, MECO. So you've been accelerated now for 3Gs for the last several minutes. And all of a sudden you go from 3Gs to 0. It's not 3Gs to 1G. It's 3Gs to 0. And so you're kind of pitched forward in your straps and everything. And that takes a little one potato, two potato to realize what has just happened. And you start looking around and everything. And you realize your arms are floating. They're not pulled by your side or, down your lap or anything like that. They're floating, and you look around and there's other little bits of FOD that have escaped and are floating around in the cockpit inside. And then finally, you have the presence of mind to look around. And I was so focused on checklists and everything else on my first flight that when we finally got to MECO and my arms floated and everything, I was trying to get everybody to do the checklist. And the skipper, Ron Graby, turned around and he whacked me on the arm and said, "Look out the window." And the thing is, you fly into orbit upside down, so the window is also not where you would expect, right? So you look out the window and doggone it, silence, absolute silence in the ship at that point because everybody is mouth breathing. The sight is so overwhelming. And you've seen it on maps, you've seen pictures, you've heard from other crew members, you've watched their movies. Until it happens to you, it's just, you're so overwhelmed, emotionally. And so at that point, I'm thinking to myself, why did I ever lose any sleep in the crew quarters? This is so magnificent and everything. And when you get back from your first flight, you want to get in line for your second flight. And the same thing is, when's my third flight?
Yeah. Oh man, that's terrific. Bill, you described for me when we chatted about STS-51 that you guys faced an issue losing communication with Houston. And I think this sort of speaks to our theme about being undaunted, about facing challenges. Things don't always go as expected. And then, how do you maintain your confidence and continue to lean forward to make good things happen? If you could describe that situation a little bit and tell us about the significance of losing communication with Houston. And then what if you hadn't been able to get it back? What were you facing at that point?
Losing comms in the space shuttle was a fairly significant hit. It happened to us early on in the mission, and you need to restore communications if you can. Otherwise, the mission's got to be aborted. What you had in the cargo bay, what you brought with you to deploy, communication satellite, for one, you realize, it's a fairly significant predicament.
Had you guys trained for anything like that? I know when you described it to me, it was something that surprised you, and it was because of something that was unexpected and what the mission specialist was doing in the back. And really, was that something that you had trained to or thought about? If you lose communication, how you're going to abort the mission and get back on Earth safely?
Well, it's something that we train for. There's a very involved and fairly lengthy procedure to restore comms. And most often, you lose comms for maybe a minute or so, and somebody on the ground sends the command to fix it, and you're back in comms. But this time, we went through the comm out procedures. We're going through all the steps, and we're realizing, we're not going to deploy the satellite. First thing is mission impact.
Right.
You're up there to deploy the satellite. So now, mission failure. And so what are we going to do to restore the comms so that we can get back and deploy the satellite? So that meant first, let's see if we can restore comms. Went through all the easy parts of the procedure. None of them worked. But I think one of the things that we did right was the way we'd been trained is keep the ground in the loop. whatever it is you're doing, don't keep it a secret. As you're going through these different steps in the procedure, bring the ground along with you. And so even though we couldn't hear anything from them, turns out they could hear us as we were going through our steps. And so when we finally got to the part where, we managed to type in the proper hexadecimal, string of letters and numbers, and that wound up changing the frequency of the payload interrogator so that it wasn't jamming the ground anymore. They were with us. We'd also taken the liberty of informing them that, we were getting through our day pretty well. We weren't particularly tired. And although we knew we were going to miss the first orbit deploy, we really thought that we ought to, press on and deploy it on the next rev. And so when we finally got comms back, the ground rogered up and said, and we like your plan. Your go for a second rev deploy.
Good stuff. Tara, you got one more question?
I guess what I think about is you're looking back now at this career from pilot, astronaut, NASA leadership. When you think about all of the things that you have done, with all that experience, how has that kind of shaped decisions that you still make in maybe what we call quote unquote real life today? With all your experience, what can we take away from these experiences that you can help us to become undaunted and better leaders?
Be humble and be a good listener.
I like that.
And when there's conflict, if you listened and you're humble, you might be part of the conflict. I mean, maybe it's a mismatch of expectations. Maybe we have different missions. It's really important, and I confess that I stole this from the Marines. Mission, man, me. Okay, that's the Holy Trinity. Mission, man, my team, right, and me. And that hierarchy, if you think of yourself last, if you have some humility, I think you're going to be a lot more successful.
That's good stuff. Before we close, Bill, one of the things that struck me in our conversations was the International Space Station while it's still up there, it sort of has dropped off the public's attention. Could you give us a little update on what you know about the work that's going on up there right now?
Sure. Yeah. International Space Station has been on orbit now and continuously crewed for 25 years. That's pretty amazing. And the thing is, the fact that it's invisible is maybe a tribute to how successful it's been.
Good point.
And the research they're doing up there is about improving life on Earth, improving human health, and pharmaceuticals, and understanding how fluids respond. Actually, they have a combustion chamber on board, trying to really and truly understand how combustion takes place, because in zero G, imagine a candle. Okay, a candle burns, draws in oxygen from the bottom, or air from the bottom, and then heat goes out the top.
Yes.
That's what didn't happen at zero G.
Yeah.
And there's no convection. Hot air is the same as cold air. It's a little bit less dense, so it moves, but it's not necessarily going to move up because there's no gravity vector.
Right.
So how things burn, we could get better at using every last molecule when it comes to fuel for automobiles and airplanes and everything else. But the other thing is, combustion chamber allows us to study, how things burn, and maybe make better materials for housing and for, vehicles and everything. So understanding the human vestibular system. There's no gravity, right? So the otolith, which is your tilt organ for your inner ear, doesn't have a vector that will give you what weighs up. And semicircular canals, the fluids in them typically is displaced a little bit differently. So when you get up in orbit, accelerations and things like that, your nystagmus reaction, there are a lot of things about human physiology that manifest themselves differently. And then finally, often we are the guinea pigs, and they take a lot of our blood and other bodily fluids and everything else, but found out that the human immune system seems to be depressed when you go and are in zero G, and particularly for a long period of time. And the way that manifests in some cases is, people get colds up in space because the immune system is depressed. The other thing is in zero G, there's a phenomenon that looks very similar to osteoporosis. And so being able to maintain bone health, long bone health in particular, we've done some work on pharmaceuticals that will actually help with osteoporosis up in orbit. But the other thing is the findings that we have really say that impact, tension on the long bones, like on a treadmill, is the most effective way to keep from losing bone mass.
Yeah.
And 2 hours of exercise a day is, we think, the minimum to maintain human health over long periods. So if you're going to be up there for, many months, Peggy Whitson on her last flight, she was up there for over 6 months. She came back with denser bones from all the working out she'd done. Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
She worked for that.
Yeah. We're just scratching the surface here, and we're going to have you back, Bill. Maybe we'll try to align it with Artemis 3 or 4 to get your insights on that. But we need to hear sometime about the time that you spent in Russia at Star City and how the culture of the Russian cosmonauts compared to your culture at NASA, and many more things. But before we wrap up, Tara, you got any final thought or takeaway?
Yeah, Bill, you gave me goosebumps. I was tearing up at one point just listening to you talk about these experiences, especially that first moment of, zero gravity, or when, your fellow pilot said, "Look out the window." I mean, just incredible. But there's just a few words that are coming to mind. Obviously, mission, trust, bravery, sacrifice, training, so many things that we can apply, respect, dedication. I love how you brought in, humble, being a good listener, determination. I mean, there's so many things that you have experienced and brought into your experiences that we can apply into our lives. So thank you so much for sharing just a brief snapshot of the sacrifice. Really, thank you on behalf of mankind for the sacrifice that you have made in all of your training and deployments and everything into space. It's just amazing.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. This was a vivid reminder of what we've always said in naval aviation is train like you fight and then fight like you train. And hearing Bill talk about the incredible detail they went into to rehearsing and practicing over and over again, all their procedures. And then here's what I often see among business teams is that they prepare for how they think it's going to go, but they may not spend enough time preparing for the what ifs that don't go the way you want it to go. How are you going to respond? And it was fascinating to hear Bill talk about how they always train to the contingencies, and even the one that occurred with regard to losing comm, they had procedures to deal with that, and therefore they remedied the situation and continued on, adapted and overcame and got the mission done and came home. So that's one that stuck with me. Bill, we'll give you the last word. Anything you'd like to leave our listeners with about anything that's on your mind, or you'd like them to know about your experience or what's going on here with Artemis and going forward, potentially to Mars at some point?
Well, first of all, I couldn't have been more pleased with Artemis 2 and the crew. Reed and Victor and Christina and Jeremy, I thought were a perfect example for, how you conduct a mission. Again, they've been together for 3 years. They've been practicing this mission for 3 years. But it was pretty clear that, during that 3 years, it wasn't all about the training necessarily. It was about the bonding as a crew, and the thing is, they were also very, very adept at bringing the launch support folks, mission control, the trainers and everything else along for the ride. What was going through my mind is, I remember my skipper at the time, we're, building our charts and everything to get ready and go out and go fly. And So, you ever show those charts to your plane captain? I mean, he knew that I didn't, right? But I knew, yeah. So got me to thinking is, plane captain never leaves the ship. Matter of fact, most of the time, he's with the airplane. If you're not in it, he's in it. So why not bring him along on a mission? Okay, this is what we're going to go do today. So now all of a sudden, the mission I'm going to go fly is now his mission. And all I can say is this crew did a magnificent job of that, and just couldn't be prouder.
Yeah, great words. And for our civilian friends, the plane captain is the young enlisted person who's assigned to the airplane on the aircraft carrier and is responsible for servicing it and taking care of it. And how wonderful that you took the time to share with him or her the, what your chart looked like and what you were about to go do. And I'm sure that young person was swelling with pride in the fact that they helped to contribute to mission success and that they were part of the team. That's very cool. So, okay, well, it's been a great session. I certainly learned a lot here. Tara, why don't you bring us home?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bill, for joining us today. And thank you for everyone listening. Of course, as usual, follow, subscribe for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're listening right now. Of course, we would love a rate and a comment as well. And leave us suggestions for what else you would like to hear us do. And we will catch you next time.
Yeah, join us here in a couple weeks. And in the meantime, be undaunted.